Alright, nerds. So now we're going to learn about the chemicals we put into the water and a little bit of where they come from and how it affects things. Alright, so what's the point of this lesson? You want to be able to understand that most chemicals used in the home or industry or even agriculture will end up in the waterways if they're not contained properly. You also want to describe various ways that chemicals are utilised in the Australian context, and that comes directly from one of our dot points. The other thing which is not on here but you also need to take notice of is you want to work on how the impacts of putting heavy metals into the water and how that can affect in general over a long period of time, but we'll get to that at the end. So that's something else you need to be aware of, and it's not written in the text there for some reason. Well, because I forgot to. All right, so quick bit of definitions for us. We want to look at, not that, that's silly. We want to look at point and non-point sources of pollution. Okay, so a non-point source of pollution is just general runoff into it. Okay, so it's not being pumped in at a specific place. So here we've got here's where the farm is, and all this area just gradually runs off into the water. A point source of pollution is where it is being all made in this thing here, this treatment plant around here, or a factory here, and it is pumped along into a specific point, at one point in the water system. Okay, so we've got non-point and point sources of pollution. All right, fertilizer. So we're going to talk mostly about three particular types of chemicals, and then we'll move on to heavy metals. The first type of chemical we're going to talk about is fertilizers. Now, this is something that we put into the soil or land to increase its fertility. Okay. Now, if we go back here, it says a chemical or natural substance. That's a bit dodgy. Everything is chemicals. Everything is chemicals. So they commonly contain like nitrates or phosphates or sulfates, potassium or ammonia, and these are all soluble in water, and this is where the problems occur. They need to be soluble in water so they can be taken up by the plants in the roots, but they are soluble in water, which means they will also make their way to the waterways. So basically we use them in non-coastal areas in particular. Coastal areas still use fertilizers, but non-coastal areas, the soil in Australia is particularly, infertile. Now, Australian soil, so why is this used in the Australian context? Australia, we have really low fertility of our soil. This is because our soils are really old, generally, and over that long period of time, the nutrients are depleted out of the soil. In particular, this is combined with like a really slow rate of soil formation. Those were tough words. Basically, the downside of using fertilizers, however, is that overuse of fertilizers can really lead to eutrophication or algal blooms in the waterways. So whenever you see algal blooms, that's usually because of excess phosphates in the water. These can also come from the home, by the way. These can come from the home from detergents. Detergents always have lots of phosphates in them. All right, herbicides. Now, these are essentially a weed control material. So a chemical that we use to kill off the weeds in our crops. Okay. Now they're specifically used for plants. Hence the herb part here means that it's to do with plants. There are several types. You've got selective herbicides which kill off specific weeds. Okay, you've got total herbicides which will kill off every plant in the area. Roundup's a good example of this. You've got translocated herbicides, and this means it's absorbed into the roots to kill plants from within. So usually you spray them on the leaves or on the soil. These ones, they go into the roots, and they make their way into the plants, much more like a drug would in an animal. You've got residual herbicides. Okay, so we apply these to the soil, and they don't do anything straight away. But as the plants germinate, they kill off the plant then. That's just a more susceptible time. So why do we use these in Australia? In Australia, in particular, if you fertilize the soil, it becomes ultra fertile. Okay, so once the soil is ultra fertile compared to what it was, weeds. What makes them weeds is that they find it easier to grow than other plants. They're super easy to grow, and they use a lot of nutrients out of the soil. Like they actually compete very, very well. So native plants, basically, they've all evolved to survive in fairly infertile and dry soil. And once a weed takes hold, it uses up all the excess nutrients or water in the soil first and leaves nothing for the native plants. So, pesticides. Basically, these are used like a herbicide to kill or control, not necessarily kill, but control non-plant pests. So they're all very specific, and that's really important. That's a big difference to the herbicides. They tend to be all fairly specific, and they're generally soluble in water. So once again, they will make their way into the waterway. It's the solubility that makes these guys really effective pollutants. So let's have a quick talk about chemicals in the home. So this is a bit tough to read, but in the bedroom, you've got all the, clothes, like they're covered in chemicals such as Teflons. We've got all these chemicals that make up the computer here. Now, a lot of people, when they think of the chemicals in the home, they're just thinking of the liquid chemicals that we use. But in actuality, this stuff will all make its way to the tip eventually, and will all eventually make its way into the waterways, which is why we've got to be very careful. So we've got nail polish, perfumes, that sort of stuff. But the main ones that people think of are down here. So all the stuff which we use for cleaning products. Cleaning products are the big concern here, and they all tend to be very basic, which means they're the opposite of an acid, and when they get into the waterways, they turn the water to a basic level. Okay. All right. Heavy metals. This is the key concept for the day, like the one that's not listed in the thing. Basically, they have massive pollutive effects. It says significant, but they're really, really bad, and they end the water as point pollution. It's rare that they go in as a just runoff. Usually they're waste, usually waste from factories and whatnot. Look, low levels tend not to be too harmful, with the exception of lead. Lead is, we'll do it over here. Lead is super harmful. Some are even essential. We need iron, we need calcium. So they tend to be at low levels, so they're not so bad. But at the high levels, they become very detrimental. So we can include mercury, cadmium, lead, copper, chromium, selenium, and arsenic. This is a guy here who has rather large levels of cadmium poisoning. And this is from a village in China where one factory in particular was leaching cadmium into its local water source. And how did it get to affect this guy so severely? Well, essentially it's this. Okay, so this is a process called, and you need to write this down, bioaccumulation. So that's bioaccumulation. Now, bioaccumulation is where in the water there's about it's 0.0, so 3 parts per thousand. Okay. Or 0.00003 parts per million. Cool. That's not a lot. And actually, that level is not so bad. You can walk around drinking that water. You're not going to have a drama at all. The zooplankton also drinks that water, and it stores it in this body because the heavy metals are so strong. Like they really stick in the body because that's where they go. You struggle to remove it. It gets in the cells and it doesn't tend to live. We've got no way of getting rid of it. So the zooplankton, it's got about 0.04 parts per million. Okay, it then gets eaten by a small fish. In this case, we're talking about DDT, which is something that was used as a pest controller, in particular mosquitoes. So here, the small fish eat the zooplankton. So the zooplankton gets eaten, and you can see that in the next level, there's more of it. Then the small fish get eaten by the big fish, and the large fish, again, we see there's more. So it just builds up, because each large fish eats lots of small fish, and once the DDT or cadmium or mercury is in the system, it never leaves. So then the DDT starts to build up in the bird which eats the big fish, because it doesn't eat one fish, it eats lots and lots of fish. And you can see how it just increases. And we've got another diagram to show that. So here we've got methyl mercury. Methyl mercury is pretty bad, causes lots of dramas. This is the last thing we're doing, by the way. So methyl mercury goes into the water. The krill eats it, and it's not really a huge problem. But then here comes the next, and we'll go with just the top ones. So the salmon comes along and it eats lots of krill. Lots and lots of krill. Okay, cool. So the salmon starts to build up. You know, it eats lots of these krill. Then the trout eats lots and lots and lots of the salmon. Okay, so it starts to build up, and you're now starting to get to a dangerous level. You can eat as much salmon as you want. So that's what this guide here is for how much you can eat. You can eat as much salmon as you want and it won't hurt you, because there's just not enough methyl mercury in it. Tuna or trout, you can eat it a few times a week and be okay. All right, you eat tuna a few times a week, you're going to be fine. If you're pregnant, you're not allowed to eat tuna at all. But you can eat tuna a few times a week. But the tunas then get eaten by the sharks, and because the shark doesn't eat one tuna, it eats lots of tuna, or the pike, or the halibut, or albacore, I don't know what that sort of fish is, but because this here has so much mercury in it, you can only eat it a couple times per month. And eventually, if you don't, you get something called Minamata Bay disease, which we'll talk about in class. Or you can look up yourself if you want to look up some depressing stuff on the internet. And that's it. That's where we're at today. So this is called bioaccumulation, where it just builds up and up and up into larger concentrations within the animal through the food chain. All right, see you in class.